She didn't come to perform. She came to ask what they were hoping no one ever would. Those words hung in the air like a guillotine as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood motionless in the middle of Donald Trump's Phoenix rally, holding up a single document that would change everything. No shouting, no theatrics, no partisan grandstanding. Just one devastating question that left the former president of the United States completely speechless for the first time in political history. The room that had been electric with chants and cheers just moments before now fell into a silence so profound you could hear the air conditioning humming overhead. Secret Service agents exchanged nervous glances. Campaign staffers froze in their tracks. And the man who had never been at a loss for words suddenly found himself unable to form a coherent response. This wasn't just a political confrontation. It was the moment the emperor's clothes disappeared in real time. If you think politics is just a game of who can yell the loudest, what you're about to witness will shatter that illusion forever. This isn't just another political takedown. It's a masterclass in how truth, when delivered with precision, can cut through years of spin and spectacle. The political playbook says you fight fire with fire, outrage with outrage. But what if the most powerful weapon against political theater isn't more theater, but its opposite? What if the antidote to chaos is calm? Hit that subscribe button right now, because this shocking confrontation reveals exactly how the powerful get away with abandoning Americans in their darkest hour, and how one fearless woman finally exposed it all with nothing but facts and unshakable composure. Trust me, you'll want to see every second of this political earthquake that's still sending aftershocks through Washington. The scene was classic Trump, a blistering Phoenix afternoon with temperatures soaring past 100 degrees, patriotic music thumping through speakers at ear-splitting volume, a sea of red MAGA hats bobbing in unison, and the former president confidently commanding the stage with his signature blend of bravado and showmanship. The venue had been carefully selected, a converted warehouse in a predominantly Republican district, filled to capacity with 2,500 of his most devoted supporters. American flags hung from every available surface. Campaign volunteers in matching T-shirts directed the crowd's energy with practiced efficiency. "We are the real America," he declared to thunderous applause that seemed to shake the very foundation of the venue, his voice booming through a state-of-the-art sound system designed to make every word feel like a proclamation from on high. "They want to tell you that you don't matter, but look around. This is the America they're afraid of." The crowd was electric, unified, and completely under his spell, exactly how he likes it. Children sat on parents' shoulders to get a better view of their hero. Veterans in military gear stood at attention. Young supporters live-streamed every moment, desperate to capture their proximity to power. Campaign staffers smiled approvingly from the sidelines, clipboards in hand, mentally calculating how many of these supporters could be converted to volunteers, donors, or social media amplifiers. Security personnel scanned the room for any sign of disruption, earpieces buzzing with updates and instructions. This was Trump territory, a perfectly choreographed display of political devotion where every chant, every reaction, every moment was designed to reinforce his unquestioned authority over the room. The temperature inside was rising, both literally and figuratively, as Trump built toward what everyone assumed would be another triumphant rally. But in the back of the room stood Jasmine Crockett, Congresswoman, seasoned attorney with a reputation for surgical precision in the courtroom, an absolutely uninvited guest. She wore no campaign buttons, carried no protest signs, just a blue blazer and an expression of calm determination that stood in stark contrast to the carnival atmosphere around her. Unlike the protesters who occasionally infiltrated these events with loud chants or disruptive banners, Crockett had entered quietly, respectfully, almost invisibly. She hadn't come to create a scene. She'd come with purpose. When a staffer at the side of the stage leaned in and whispered something into Trump's earpiece, his eyes narrowed as he spotted her in the crowd. The teleprompter continued scrolling with his prepared remarks, but Trump, always preferring improvisation to script, sensed an opportunity. His reaction was predictable. "Oh, look," he smirked into the microphone, his voice dripping with condescension. "A visitor from the other side of the aisle. Here to take notes, sweetheart?" The crowd laughed on cue, phones raised to capture what they assumed would be another entertaining takedown of a political opponent. Parents nudge their children to pay attention. This, their expressions seem to say, is how you handle the opposition. Trump, sensing an opportunity to humiliate an adversary on his home turf, cockily offered her 30 seconds to speak. "More than your party ever gave me," he added, to more laughter and scattered applause. His supporters nudged each other, anticipating the verbal slaughter they'd come to enjoy at his rallies. Some even turned their phones toward Crockett, eager to capture her humiliation for their social media feeds. The campaign's digital director moved closer, recognizing a potential viral moment in the making. It was a classic Trump trap. Give the opposition just enough rope to hang themselves, then demolish them with a witty comeback while his base cheers. He'd done it countless times before to journalists, political rivals, and even members of his own administration who dared to challenge him. The formula was simple and devastatingly effective: bait, humiliate, celebrate. The crowd would go home with another story of how their champion had vanquished yet another enemy, reinforcing their belief in his invincibility. The clips would circulate online, further energizing his base and demoralizing his opponents. It was political theater at its most effective, entertainment disguised as governance. But Crockett wasn't there to play his game. She wasn't there to match insults or engage in the performative outrage that defines modern political discourse. She hadn't come to make a name for herself or to create content for campaign ads. And what happened next would turn this routine rally into the most devastating public exposure of Trump's presidency, a moment that would be analyzed by political strategists for years to come. Unlike the typical Democratic politician who might have launched into an angry tirade or tried to match Trump's bombastic style with their own brand of theatrics, Crockett remained perfectly still. She didn't approach the stage. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even acknowledge Trump's attempt to belittle her with the dismissive sweetheart comment that would have triggered most politicians into an emotional response. She didn't take the bait because she hadn't come to fight Trump on his terms. She had come to change the terms entirely. She simply turned to the crowd, not to Trump, but to the people who had come to hear him, and asked a question that cut through the partisan noise like a knife through warm butter. How many of you lost someone during Hurricane Harvey? The question wasn't delivered with a politician's practiced cadence or a protester's angry shout. It was asked with the simple, direct tone of someone who genuinely wants an answer. And that authenticity, so rare in political spaces, is what made it impossible to ignore. The shift in the room was immediate and palpable. Shoulders stiffened, smiles faded, phones lowered slightly as people processed what they'd just heard. This wasn't political theater anymore. This wasn't about Democrats versus Republicans or liberals versus conservatives. This wasn't even about Trump versus his enemies. This was personal, real, raw. The question hung in the air, impossible to dismiss with a joke or a catchphrase. It demanded engagement on a human level, not a partisan one. How many of you are still waiting for help that was promised, but never came? She continued, her voice steady and clear, carrying to every corner of the room without needing a microphone. There was no accusation in her tone, no anger, just a straightforward inquiry that invited honest reflection. And that was precisely what made it so powerful and so dangerous to the carefully constructed narrative of the rally. The silence that followed wasn't just uncomfortable, it was devastating. People glanced at each other, unsure what to say or how to react. A woman clutched her purse tighter to her chest, her knuckles whitening. A man in a red MAGA cap folded his arms defensively, his expression conflicted. Parents pulled their children closer, as if to shield them not from a threat, but from a truth they weren't prepared to explain. An elderly couple in matching patriotic t-shirts exchanged a look that contained volumes of unspoken pain. Trump shifted behind the podium, opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For perhaps the first time, he seemed to realize that his usual arsenal of deflections and distractions might not work here. His teleprompter continued scrolling with talking points about immigration and the economy, but those prepared remarks suddenly seemed irrelevant, disconnected from the raw human question that now dominated the room. Because this wasn't about politics anymore. It wasn't about scoring points or winning news cycles or energizing the base. It was about accountability, a concept that transcends party lines and speaks to something more fundamental, the basic covenant between leaders and those they claim to serve. It was about promises made and broken, about help offered and withheld, about the gap between campaign rhetoric and lived reality. And in that moment, that gap was no longer an abstraction. It had a voice, a face, and a question that demanded an answer. Security started moving toward her. Two men in black suits with earpieces weaving through the crowd with practiced efficiency. Their faces remained professionally neutral, but their purposeful movement conveyed clear intent. This disruption needed to be contained. The campaign's crisis management protocol was activating. Staffers began exchanging urgent text messages. The press secretary moved closer to the stage, ready to intervene if necessary. But Trump, still confident he could regain control of the situation, waved them off with a dismissive gesture. Nah, he chuckled into the mic, attempting to reclaim the moment with forced casualness. Let her talk. Give her 30 seconds. Let's have a little entertainment. The word entertainment hung in the air, revealing more about his approach to governance than any policy paper ever could. It was the inadvertent admission that for him, this was all performance, all spectacle, even when the subject was human suffering. It was a fatal miscalculation that would come to haunt his campaign for months to come. Because Jasmine Crockett wasn't there to entertain. She wasn't there to perform or provoke or create a viral moment for social media. She wasn't there to build her brand or launch a book tour or position herself for higher office. She was there to expose a truth that had been buried beneath years of political spectacle and partisan bickering. I'm not here for entertainment, she replied calmly, her legal training evident in her measured tone. Each word was delivered with precision, without emotion clouding the message. I'm here because someone needs to ask what happened. The simplicity of the statement was its power. Not I'm here to accuse or I'm here to attack, but I'm here to ask. Framing herself not as an adversary, but as a seeker of truth, a representative doing the basic work of representation. The crowd was now completely silent, all eyes fixed on this woman who refused to be intimidated by the former most powerful man in the world or his supporters. The energy in the room had transformed from the artificial high of campaign rhetoric to something more genuine, collective attention. Trump tried to shrug it off, to appear unbothered, but something was changing in the room. The energy was shifting. People weren't looking at him anymore. The man who commanded attention in every room he entered, whose entire political persona was built on being the center of gravity. They were looking at her, this uninvited guest who had somehow managed to change the rules of engagement without raising her voice, without making a scene, without any of the tactics that typically define political confrontation in the modern era. And then came the moment that would explode across social media within minutes, generating millions of views and thousands of think pieces from political analysts across the spectrum. Crockett reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a single folded document, worn, creased, like it had been read and reread countless times. Not a prop created for dramatic effect, but a real piece of evidence that carried the weight of official government business. The paper itself looked unremarkable, standard government letterhead, columns of numbers, official stamps, but she handled it with the reverence of someone who understood its significance beyond the dry data it contained. This, she said, holding it up just high enough for the front row to see, but not so high as to seem theatrical, is a federal emergency budget report from 2020. The crowd leaned forward almost involuntarily, curiosity overcoming partisan loyalty. Even those who had been most vocal in their support of Trump moments earlier found themselves drawn to this unexpected turn of events. Trump's smile began to fade as he realized this wasn't going to be the easy dismissal he had anticipated. This wasn't a hysterical protester he could mock. This wasn't a political opponent making vague accusations. This was something far more dangerous. Specific evidence presented with the confidence of someone who had done their homework. Campaign staffers exchanged nervous glances. The communications director began frantically typing on her phone, likely trying to determine what document Crockett was holding and what narrative they could craft in response. It details a $47 million allocation earmarked for hurricane relief in Texas. She continued, her voice never rising, but somehow commanding complete attention. She paused, allowing the figure to sink in. $47 million, not an abstract number, but a concrete sum that represented real help for real people in real crisis. But the money never got there. A murmur rippled through the crowd as she slowly unfolded the document with the deliberate care of someone who understands the power of official records. Parents who had brought children to witness their hero now looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Veterans who had cheered minutes earlier now listened with the focused attention of those who understand the importance of duty and follow-through. No explanation, no follow-up, just gone. The simplicity of the statement underscored its gravity. Not embezzled, not reallocated, not delayed, just gone, vanished into the bureaucratic ether while people suffered. Then she turned to the final page and delivered the knockout blow that would be replayed on news networks for weeks. At the bottom of the authorization line, there's a signature. She held up the page again, this time turning it so that those in the front could clearly see the official government letterhead, the date stamp, the authorization codes, all the elements that transform a piece of paper into an official record of government action or, in this case, inaction. Not a name, just initials scribbled, barely legible. No title, no transparency. She looked directly at Trump and asked the question that would haunt his campaign for months to come. Who signed it? Three simple words that contained within them an entire indictment of a system designed to obscure responsibility rather than enforce it. The room froze in a tableau of suspended animation. Trump gripped the podium with both hands so tightly his knuckles whitened, cleared his throat like he was ready to crack a joke, reclaim the room, swing the spotlight back in his favor. His eyes darted to the teleprompter, but the prepared text scrolling there offered no guidance for this unscripted moment. Campaign advisors stood motionless at the edges of the stage, their usual confidence replaced by visible concern. But nothing came out. For perhaps the first time in his political career, Donald Trump, the man known for always having a comeback, always controlling the narrative, always dominating every room he entered, was completely speechless. The silence stretched for 5 seconds, 10, 15, an eternity in political theater where every moment is usually filled with noise, movement, distraction. The crowd, trained to respond to any pause with chants or applause, remained quiet, sensing that something unprecedented was unfolding. And then something even more extraordinary happened. From the front row, a man wearing one of those red MAGA hats, the very symbol of unwavering Trump loyalty, slowly leaned forward and said, without raising his voice, "She's right." The crowd turned to look at him, stunned by this breach in solidarity. He wasn't a plant or a protester. He was one of them, a supporter who had come to cheer, not challenge. Campaign staffers froze, unsure how to respond to this unscripted moment of truth from within their own ranks. The man's hands trembled slightly, suggesting the personal cost of speaking up in that environment, but his voice remained steady. "I was in Houston that year," he continued, his voice cracking slightly with emotion that had clearly been suppressed for too long. "I remember the flood. We lost everything. Our house, our cars, my wife's mother's ashes, all gone. We filled out every form they gave us. We waited in lines for hours. We called the numbers they told us to call." He paused, swallowing hard. "We didn't get a dime." The unraveling had begun, not with a bang, but with a quiet admission of truth that was more powerful than any protest could have been. A woman lowered her campaign sign and placed it gently in her lap, her expression thoughtful rather than angry. A veteran in uniform stared at Crockett, not with hostility, but with curiosity and something that looked remarkably like respect. A young couple who had been enthusiastically filming the rally for their social media now lowered their phones, their expressions suggesting they were processing something they hadn't expected to confront today. The cameras that had been focused exclusively on Trump now swiveled to capture this unprecedented moment of a rally, transforming into something entirely different. A genuine conversation about governance and accountability. If you're shocked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. Because what happened next reveals exactly how powerful the truth can be when someone has the courage to speak it without shouting, without grandstanding, without the theatrical outrage that has become the currency of modern political discourse. This isn't just about one rally or one politician. It's about the moment when political theater collides with lived reality and reality wins. Jasmine Crockett didn't wait for permission to leave. She didn't bow, wave, or gesture for applause. She didn't try to press her advantage or humiliate Trump further. She didn't launch into a campaign speech or use the moment to promote herself. She simply turned and walked toward the exit with the same quiet dignity with which she had entered. Her work was done. The question had been asked. The document had been shown. The truth had been spoken. And sometimes that's enough. No one stopped her. Not security, not staff, not even Trump. Because in that moment, even he knew nothing he could say would match the weight of what had already been spoken. The document had done what no amount of debate could accomplish. It had transformed an abstract political argument into concrete evidence of a specific failure with real consequences for real people. As she made her way toward the exit, the silence followed her like an invisible cloak. Then from somewhere in the middle of the crowd came a sound, a single clap, then another. Not fast, not loud, just deliberate, scattered, like people unsure if it was allowed, but too moved not to respond. It wasn't the thunderous applause that typically fills rally venues. It wasn't the coordinated chanting that political events are known for. It wasn't even particularly enthusiastic. It was something far more powerful, recognition, a quiet acknowledgement that someone had finally spoken truth to power in a way that couldn't be dismissed or spun or tweeted away. The clapping didn't spread to the entire crowd. Many remained loyal to Trump, uncomfortable with this disruption of their expected experience. But enough joined in to create a moment that defied the usual political categories of victory and defeat. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about something more fundamental, the right of citizens to ask questions and expect answers from those who claim to lead them. Within an hour, the footage had gone viral, spreading across platforms with the unstoppable force of a truth too compelling to ignore. The campaign's attempt to control the narrative by cutting the moment from their official live stream backfired spectacularly as dozens of attendees had already uploaded their own videos. Headlines flashed across the country. One question, one room, one silence America didn't expect. The document Trump couldn't answer for. Hurricane Harvey victims still waiting for answers. Screenshots of Crockett holding the paper, the frozen look on Trump's face, the man in the red hat nodding. All of it spread like wildfire, transcending the usual partisan bubbles that contain political news. CNN ran the clip on a loop, with analysts breaking down every second of the interaction. Fox News hosts struggled to frame the narrative, some dismissing it as a staged stunt, while others acknowledged the power of the moment. MSNBC analysts dissected the body language, the document itself, and the implications for Trump's campaign messaging about government accountability. Political strategists from both parties appeared on panels, most agreeing that they had witnessed a masterclass in effective confrontation. Not because it was loud or dramatic, but precisely because it wasn't. But the real impact wasn't in the headlines or the cable news coverage. It wasn't in the think pieces or the political newsletters or the campaign strategy meetings hastily convened to address the fallout. It was in the comment sections, the text messages, the quiet conversations at kitchen tables across America. People weren't arguing over party lines or retreating to their usual talking points. They weren't debating liberal versus conservative approaches to disaster relief. They were asking the same question Jasmine had asked: who signed it? And then came deeper questions that spread from household to household, community to community. If they could forget us during the flood, what else have they erased while we weren't watching? What other promises have been made and broken? What other signatures have been scribbled on documents authorizing help that never arrived? What other disasters, natural or man-made, have been used for photo ops and then forgotten when the cameras leave? Because this wasn't just about $47 million, a figure that can seem abstract to many Americans. It wasn't even just about Hurricane Harvey, though the disaster had claimed more than 100 lives and caused $120 billion in damage. It was about all the moments that disappeared in the shadows of bureaucracy, all the pain swept under headlines, all the signatures that never had names, all the accountability that evaporates when the cameras turn away. It was about the fundamental contract between the governed and those who govern, a contract that requires transparency, follow-through, and basic human decency. When asked later by a reporter why she had gone to that rally uninvited, a move that political consultants would typically advise against as high risk with potentially catastrophic backfire potential, Jasmine simply replied with the line that would become her signature, "I didn't want to speak, but I couldn't stay silent." That sentence became a rallying cry across social media platforms, transcending political divisions and speaking to something more fundamental about civic responsibility. Couldn't stay silent trended for days as people shared their own stories of being forgotten by those in power. Stories of promises made during campaigns and forgotten after elections, of communities used as backdrops for political photo ops and then abandoned when real help was needed. A Vietnam veteran posted about waiting years for VA benefits. A teacher shared her story of politicians touring her underfunded school for campaign photos, then voting against education funding increases. A nurse described politicians praising healthcare workers as heroes during COVID while failing to provide adequate protective equipment. The hashtag became a repository of American disappointment, but also of renewed determination to hold leaders accountable. Trump's campaign scrambled to respond, cycling through a series of increasingly desperate explanations that only served to extend the story's news cycle. First, they claimed the document was fake, a political prop created to embarrass the former president. When government records confirmed its authenticity, they pivoted to claiming the funds had been reallocated for more urgent priorities without specifying what those were. When journalists pressed for details on these priorities, they shifted again, suggesting the money had been distributed through alternative channels. When those channels couldn't be identified, they finally attempted to shift blame, suggesting it was an Obama-era decision that Trump had inherited. But the damage was done. The question remained unanswered. Who signed it? And in that unanswered question lay the entire problem. A system designed to diffuse responsibility to the point where no one could be held accountable for failures that affected thousands of lives. What makes this confrontation so extraordinary isn't just that it happened, but how it happened. In an era of political theater where the loudest voice usually wins, where outrage is currency and spectacle is expected, where politicians on both sides have become performers first and public servants second, Crockett demonstrated that sometimes the most devastating weapon against power isn't shouting, it's evidence. She didn't come to perform. She came with receipts. She didn't engage in the expected ritual of partisan combat. She simply asked a question that needed asking and presented a document that spoke for itself. And in doing so, she transformed what could have been just another partisan shouting match into something far more powerful, a moment of genuine accountability that transcended the usual political divisions. She reminded everyone watching that politics isn't supposed to be entertainment. It's supposed to be governance. And governance requires answering for decisions made, money spent or not spent, and promises kept or broken. The aftermath continues to reverberate through American politics like aftershocks from an earthquake. 3 congressional committees have now opened investigations into the missing hurricane relief funds, with bipartisan support unusual in today's polarized environment. Journalists have uncovered similar disappearances in disaster relief allocations across 5 other states, revealing a pattern of neglect that spans administrations and party lines. FEMA has announced a comprehensive audit of all disaster relief funds allocated but not distributed over the past decade, and polls show a significant shift in how voters view promises made during campaign season, with 67% saying they now want to see specific plans for implementation rather than just emotional appeals. Campaign consultants are now advising candidates to prepare for voters, bringing documents and specific questions to events, a development that some call the Crockett effect. But perhaps the most profound impact is on how ordinary Americans now approach political rallies and town halls. Across the country, people are showing up with documents, records, and specific questions about promises made to their communities. They're bringing flood maps to climate change discussions, budget reports to infrastructure announcements, and healthcare bills to Medicare debates. They're not coming to protest or to disrupt. They're coming for answers. And they're doing it with the quiet determination that Crockett modeled so effectively. They're not shouting. They're not performing. They're simply asking the questions that matter to their lives and communities and expecting, demanding, answers from those who seek their votes. So what does this moment teach us about power, truth, and the courage to speak up when it would be easier to stay silent? What does it reveal about the state of our democracy and the potential for citizens to reclaim their role in the political process? Drop a comment below with your thoughts. I want to hear from you. Was Crockett right to confront Trump in his own rally? Should more politicians be held accountable for promises that vanish after the cameras leave? Do you think this moment will have lasting impact, or will we return to politics as usual? Let me know what you think. If this video made you think differently about political engagement, share it with someone who needs to see it. Because in a country overwhelmed by shouting, Jasmine Crockett reminded us that the voice that doesn't rise can become the one that stays. Sometimes all it takes is one person standing still to remind a room that the truth doesn't shout. It waits for someone brave enough to ask what others hope no one ever will. It waits for someone to bring not accusations, but evidence. Not outrage, but facts. Not performance, but purpose. If you believe in holding power accountable no matter which party is in charge, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because in these divided times, we need more moments where truth breaks through the noise, and I'll be here to bring them to you as they happen, analyzing the moments that matter beyond the partisan spin. Remember, silence only protects those who have something to hide. The question is, are you brave enough to break it? And will you be ready when your moment comes to stand up and ask the question no one wants to answer? Because in the end, democracy isn't a spectator sport. It requires all of us to participate, to question, to demand better, not with shouting, but with substance, not with performance, but with persistence, not with theater, but with truth.